Hi, my name is Kelly Seals. I have been teaching for 5 years. I am currently an English as a second language teacher at Perry Elementary in Iowa, and my research paper is titled Explicit Vocabulary Instruction and Reading Comprehension of Fourth Grade English Learners. So, the English learner population is growing in America. Specifically at my school in Perry, we have a large number of ELs. Many of these students have been in our EL program for several years and are still not reaching proficiency. They are called long-term ELs. This population of students is especially prevalent at my school. One reason is they are not passing their English language proficiency exam due in part to low reading comprehension scores. So this means that they are continuing to be pulled away from the general ed classroom and their peers. It also means that the district is still having to find ways to fund these extra services long after these students should be proficient, according to what research says about the amount of time it takes to become proficient in English. One reason that these ELs may be struggling with reading comprehension is due to having a limited vocabulary. So previous research suggests that a large vocabulary is needed in order to read and understand academic texts. Many of these students may have spoken another language the first 5 years of their life before starting school in kindergarten here and learning English. So they've started with a limited vocabulary, and research says that starting with a limited vocabulary often continues throughout their schooling and makes reading comprehension difficult. Previous research suggests that there is a connection between the amount of vocabulary a student has and their reading comprehension. Some past studies have shown that a vocabulary intervention can actually improve reading comprehension. However, some have not found that connection. The gap in this research remains that none of it has looked specifically at these long-term English learners to see if the vocabulary intervention might be the tool to help close the gap. After looking at this past research, the question remained, does an explicit academic vocabulary intervention have an effect on the reading comprehension of fourth grade English learners? So the purpose of this study was to determine if an explicit academic vocabulary intervention could improve these students' reading comprehension enough to close their achievement gap and help them reach proficiency on their language proficiency exam each year. Previous research did not look at this population specifically. Based on the performance of my students in my school, it's clear that they need a form of intervention to help improve that reading comprehension. So therefore, this intervention could potentially be one that is used across the country to help our long-term English learners reach their proficiency, as well as could be implemented as school-wide across our EL program at my school. I hypothesized that during this intervention of this study, during the intervention phases, the participants' reading comprehension scores would be higher than during the baseline phases. This study used an A-B single subject design. This was due to the low number of participants included. It lasted 12 weeks. Each phase was 3 weeks long and alternated from baseline to intervention, baseline to intervention. Data was collected at the end of each week. The 12 participants were all fourth grade English learners at the intermediate level. They were ages 9 to 10. There were 8 girls and 4 boys. 11 of them were Hispanic and spoke Spanish as a first language, while 1 was African American and spoke Swahili as a first language. For the regular instruction portion of this study, where no intervention was being applied, the participants used the National Geographic Reach curriculum at level E, which is the fourth grade level. This includes a textbook and a handout packet of worksheets and graphic organizers to accompany it. The program teaches vocabulary, grammar, reading comprehension, and writing. The intervention portion of this study consisted of a worksheet that I adapted from Dr. Kate Kinsella's Academic Vocabulary Toolkit 4 for the fourth grade level. It was a 3-column worksheet that followed a gradual release model of instruction. In the first column, there was space for the vocabulary words definition and any synonyms or antonyms. In the second column were 3 sentence stems, each using the vocabulary word in a different context. I would model the first sentence with a think aloud. Then the participants and I would complete the second sentence together, and finally they would complete the third independently and then share their answers and receive feedback. In the third column, they drew a quick picture to visually represent the word in one of those sentences. This is an example of what that worksheet might look like. For the assessment portion of this study, the participants took the EASY CBM multiple choice reading comprehension assessment. This was done online using their individual student Chromebooks. It consists of 1 fourth grade passage and then 20 multiple choice questions following that. It's not timed, though it was suggested that it typically takes 20 to 30 minutes to complete. This assessment has moderate reliability and validity. So the study had 2 phases, baseline and intervention. During the baseline phase, participants would come to their 30-minute group for ESL and receive 30 minutes of that regular instruction using their National Geographic curriculum. This happened Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. On Friday, they would come in and take the EASY CBM assessment for 20 to 30 minutes, and then with any remaining time, they would receive regular instruction. During the intervention phase, participants would arrive and immediately receive a 10-minute intervention, which consisted of completing that worksheet for the vocabulary word of the day. And then they would receive regular instruction for the remaining 20 minutes of group time. Again, that was Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Fridays, they would come in, receive the 10-minute intervention, and then take the 20 to 30-minute EASY CBM assessment. Data was collected at the end of each week. So there were 12 data points for each participant. I used 2 paired samples t-tests to analyze the mean score of each phase. So the mean of the first baseline was compared to the mean of the first intervention phase. The mean of the second was compared to the mean of the second intervention phase. The results did not support the hypothesis. The t-tests found that there was no significant difference in the means of the baseline phase scores and the intervention phase scores. The first baseline phase had an average score of 7.92. The first intervention phase had an average score of 8.67. So the intervention phase was higher than the baseline phase, though the t-test with a p-score of 0.15 found that it was not statistically significant. Table 1 here shows the results of that first t-test. T-score was negative 1.49. The degrees of freedom were 35. The p-score was negative 0.15, and the effect size was negative 0.25. The second baseline phase had an average score of 8.42, and the second intervention phase had an average score of 8.69. So again, the intervention was higher than the baseline, though according to the second t-test with a p-score of 0.71, it was not statistically significant. Table 2 shows the results of that second t-test with a t-score of negative 0.37, again, degrees of freedom at 35, a p-score of 0.71, and the effect size of negative 0.06. Figure 1 here shows the mean score of each phase. So you can see that the scores during the intervention phases are higher than during the baseline. Both intervention phases were almost identical with their mean score. And the second baseline phase was higher than the first, though according to the t-test, none of these improvements were statistically significant, or the difference was not significant. So the purpose of this study was to determine if explicit academic vocabulary instruction could improve fourth grade EL's reading comprehension and close the achievement gap. This study found that it does not. At least the intervention done the way it was designed for this study did not improve reading comprehension. The implications of this study are then that this intervention would be ineffective at improving these long-term EL's reading comprehension, and it would not be recommended to use school-wide as I had hoped. However, looking at past research and the information processing theory, Some limitations to the design of this intervention become clear and suggest that if it were designed differently, perhaps the results would be different. Because of this, future research is recommended. So past research has shown mixed results on vocabulary interventions. Many found that a vocabulary intervention did lead to improved reading comprehension. However, some did not. This study falls in with those that did not necessarily find improvement. There are some important differences to note about these previous studies. The ones that found more positive results tended to use a larger sample size, hundreds of participants, whereas those that did not find a connection tended to have smaller sample sizes, much like the size of this study. Or they were pilot studies and didn't have enough information in the research. The information processing theory was used to design this intervention. It suggests that information is input into the short-term or working memory, and then it must be elaborated on before it can be moved into long-term memory and be truly learned. And the extent and depth of that elaboration is key to how it's moved into long-term memory. So looking at the design of this study had a small sample size of only 12 participants. This was just due to scheduling and the availability of these students to me as the researcher. This matched some of those previous studies that didn't find a connection between vocabulary interventions and reading comprehension. Perhaps this sample size is just too small to see those positive effects if they exist. So in the future, I would recommend a larger sample size. Also, this study had a short intervention time of only 10 minutes a day. Most of the previous research had intervention times of 30 minutes or more. So when considering that information processing theory, it's possible that 10 minutes just isn't enough elaboration to move the knowledge of those vocabulary words into long-term memory. However, this can't be known since there was no measure in place to monitor how well the students were learning these new vocabulary words. And since that measure did not exist in this study, it is difficult to say whether or not learning new vocabulary affects reading comprehension because we can't say for sure whether the students actually acquired the new vocabulary knowledge. So, in the future, based on those limitations, changes to the design of this research would be suggested. As it was designed, the results did not support the hypothesis. There were limitations involving the sample size, the length of intervention, and a lack of sufficient measures to monitor the students' understanding of vocabulary. So future research is suggested with this specialized population to see if there is a connection between a vocabulary intervention and improving these long-term ELs' reading comprehension to therefore help them reach their English proficiency faster. Thank you.